Good day, everybody. This is Patty again, continuing on with my series of communication, the art of communication. But today I want to talk more about the art of reading body language. Research tells us that body language is one of the most overlooked languages in the world, and that 55% of what we say is nonverbal. So this isn't to be confused, though, with solitary gestures in body language that require you to view it in context rather than judge it. So, for example, if you see someone with their arms crossed, okay, typically we're taught that it interprets as a defensive mechanism. And someone has their wall up. But to see this in context, for instance, if you see this individual outdoors and they've got their arms crossed, this would generally mean that maybe they're just cold, right? Um, or if you see someone who is scratching their head, for instance, it could be because they just have dandruff as opposed to, or maybe it's, like this. Some people when they're nervous, right? But when it's combined with a combination, so a little more study on this and when we talk about this, and you'll be able to distinguish between the different gestures, and that in turn can help you maximize your communication skills, because it's actually our involuntary gestures that will tell a lot about ourselves. So body language itself is like any language out there. In verbal languages, there's words, there's sentences, there's phrases, and there's punctuation. And you have to take a series of words in order to get an understanding of what each individual word means. And it's no different with body language. Only with body language, we call this clusters of gestures. So when we have a cluster of gestures communicated, then that would indicate a bigger picture of what each one individually means. Or not individually, but together you could come up with this. But for instance, have you ever watched the TV show The Mentalist? If you have, you'll notice that that's exactly what he did. He did it very well. He perfected the art of interpreting clusters of gestures or body language. And he was able to tell when someone was lying, telling the truth, or holding something back. So you can't rely on just one body gesture. So keeping this in mind, we can learn to adapt certain body techniques as ourselves to communicate to others that we're trustworthy and we're open. So that was my primary objective today, was because for those of us who do video marketing and your audience is within your immediate reach and there's not that face-to-face, there's some really good techniques that you can come across and perfect to indicate to your audience, your intended audience, that you are open and you're trustworthy and what you're sharing with them is valid. So some of those things are to be sure that if you're sitting down, to be sure that your shoulders are back and that you're sitting fairly tall, and that what that does is it protrudes your chest out, your heart. And when your heart is extended outwards, it's almost intuitive for us to speak the truth. There's a psychology to it, believe me. And when we put ourselves out there like that, when we stand out like that, we can't help but project a genuine authenticity. So when you sit, and you sit as tall as you can, and be conscious of that. Standing tall, same thing. You always want to have your hands in a forward or an outward position. Actually, the one thing I wanted to talk about when you sit tall and that, because the reason for that is that studies have shown that people that appear to be taller have a more dominant or a more leadership quality than those who are shorter. So if you can appear to be taller, sorry, short people, I mean, I'm there too, but it can just be your stance. When you can appear taller. Remember what I was saying in a previous communication about complimenting and positive talk to other people, that you appear taller, slimmer, and younger? Well, there's a reason behind all of it. There's psychology behind it. You can use with your hands, always talk with your hands in a forward and an outward position. Use universal gestures to indicate trust, as the okay gesture, a thumbs up, and of course nodding for affirmation. When you're nodding and you're speaking truth, there's an authenticity that comes out with it. Otherwise, if you're talking and you're trying to convey to somebody something and it isn't the truth, your body language will show that. You'll be fidgety and this sort of thing. So sitting with your arm crossed is a pretty good indicator that you're a closed individual. So you don't want to be sitting in front of your screen and talking to somebody like this, because that's not a good indicator that you want to communicate with anybody. Take your arms uncrossed, and you're opening yourself up here. There was also a study, though, I wanted to get across to that. People who sit with their arms crossed, they actually have a 40% less receptiveness to what you're saying, and they also construe everything you say as something that's going to be negative to them. So keep that in mind with an audience if you come out when you stand out there, or even if you're seeing your audience with a closed arm gesture, whatever. Maybe even just sit and do a little practice with them. So for instance, noticing which way a person crosses their arms is a pretty good indicator of what the type of person that they are. So bear with me for a second here. Well, right now what I want you to do is just cross your arms, okay? Do that with me. Have you done it? Okay, great. Which arms did you cross over? Did you cross left over right? If you did, then you're probably right-handed. 7 out of 10 people cross their arms left over right. So that's left over right. And they're generally right-handed. And the right-handed people are generally dominated by the left brain, right? Which is logical, the sequential, the mathematical side of the brain. They compartmentalize. So in knowing that, then that also helps you and gives you an indicator, the type of communication that you need to have, especially if you have an audience that's predominantly left-handed or right-handed. So just to kind of indicate how strong that is, what I want you to do right now is just cross your arms in the opposite direction. So if you're generally left over right, then do your right over the left. So for me, that's left over my right, which is difficult, isn't it? It's not easy. Well, that's because you're primarily a left or a right brain. There are those of us who are middle brainers. That's another story. So this isn't something that you'll personally really need for video marketing unless you're the individual that's sitting with your arms crossed. So you're going to need to deal with whatever that is that you're having trouble with, that where you're focusing on crossing your arms. Maybe it's just a comfort situation, but get rid of it. You have to find another comfortable way to sit if you want to portray or communicate to your audience that you are not closed, that you are open, and you're willing to talk and negotiate and talk to them. So the other thing is too, is if you're lying to someone too, your body language, I want to touch on that, even though it doesn't really apply for video marketing. But of course, if you're sitting there and you're going like this, and you're talking to the individual and your hands going over your mouth, you're rubbing your eye, you're looking down, you're kind of just doing this sort of thing, and you rub under the nose. These are all primary gestures, clusters of gestures that indicate to someone that you're not telling the truth. And people will have that, where you've experienced yourself, I'm sure, where you're listening to someone and what they're saying sounds good, but you've got this gut feeling that something just isn't right. Well, that's your intuition, and your intuition is telling you that you've perceived their body language is out of sync with what they're saying. So keep that in mind when you're talking with your intended audience as well. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about too is, I guess, with palms, right? I know I touched on it earlier, but the hands are probably the most common gesture when indicating to someone how you're thinking or how you're feeling. So when you want to communicate a trusting persona to anyone, okay, talk with your hands open or outward. have your fingers slightly spread apart and gesturing towards the intended party. So also the people that talk with their hands or their palms up, they are generally more trusting and easier to talk with than those who hide their palms, if they're down behind their back or this sort of thing. Or with their hands in their pockets, or if they're jingling coins, that sort of thing, then they're generally lying. Okay, if you're in front of an audience, this not only calms you down if you're nervous in front of an audience, but it also indicates confidence. Okay, so if you're in front of an audience, put your fingers together in a steeple, and you can talk like this. That's a really good indicator that you're in control of what you're talking about. When you see someone that's doing this, generally indicates that they're not trustworthy. This is a gesture of what's in it for me. If you have someone that, this sort of thing, then you know that they have your best interest in mind. Of course, there's always the finger pointing. Don't get into a finger pointing. The fingers always are viewed as a dominant dictatorial act, okay? There's the baton gesture, the hammering of the finger. That's usually an indicator of a physical affront that's coming up. But also, too, just as I know this, it doesn't count for video marketing, but when you're out and you're networking and that, handshakes are very important, too, because they indicate three things: equality, dominance, or submissiveness. So, the handshake itself actually started out as a hand wrestling gesture, but it has evolved to mean when the sideways gesture like this, when you shake hands, is an indicator of equality, that you view each other with mutual respect and equality. When an individual comes at you with the hands slight over like this, when they come over top, that means that they're coming at you in a dominant position, that they're going to take control of the situation. If someone comes in like this with their hand underneath and indicates, and for you to put your hand over top, they're saying to you that they're coming to you in a submissive position and that they are okay with you taking over as the leader or whatever. So if you are in a situation where you don't want to be dominated by the individual and they come at you like this, the best way to do it is just grab it. It's better to ask for forgiveness than to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. So in conclusion, I just wanted to add, there was a test that was done to see which gender was better at reading the body language. And what they did is the study was done of the body language of a crying baby. And what the study showed, that when a woman was presented with a crying baby, she could actually distinguish out of a total of 5 gestures as to why the baby was crying. And that was, they're either hungry, they're in pain, they're scared, or tired, or they just want attention. And when the men were presented with a crying baby, all they saw was a crying baby. So, sorry guys, but women are intuitively wired and born that way. It's a survival instinct. So anyway, I hope this helps you on your journey to becoming a better communicator, or will, at the very least, have you more conscious of your own body language and that of what you want to portray to your audience. So with all that being said, I want to thank you for stopping by today. This is Patty once again, and I just want to wish you a great day and make it count.